Advanced economies come with tremendous rewards in the form of better standards of living, longer lives, and greater opportunity for self-determination. But from time to time, they are afflicted by bouts of recession from those rewards. We've charted the progression of economic thinking. Every time a new crisis came, so did a new theory to explain it. And each time economists thought they had finally solved the problem for good, only to find a new breed of recession to stump them again. The classical school thought that economies would manage themselves through markets and the price system. Leave it alone, they said, each panic. The economy will find the best path through. John Maynard Keynes disagreed, and the Great Depression was a crisis large enough to force economists to rethink their doctrines. Keynes saw recessions as being caused by a shortfall in aggregate demand that follows a change in sentiments among consumers and investors. People get spooked, they stop spending, and sticky prices and wages mean the fall in demand will cause unemployment. And if we let things get bad, sentiments will worsen, and the recession will become a depression. Instead, Keynes recommended that if people weren't going to spend money, and no one was going to borrow and invest in the economy, then the government might as well take up the mantle and fill the void with deficit spending. At the time, the only ones with an alternative to Keynes were the Austrians. They saw the problem as being one of government intervention, and therefore more government intervention could not possibly be the solution. For the Austrians, recessions were the inevitable consequence of economic booms brought on by the printing of too much money, driving interest rates to artificially low levels. The low interest rates discourage savings and encourage investment, but scarcity means we cannot have both. As consumers and investors both reach for more, they come up empty-handed, and the economy collapses when people's disillusionment is set right. The Austrian narrative left too much unexplained, but some agreed that more government intervention wasn't the answer. The monetarists identified the cause of recessions to be monetary shocks, not animal spirits. When the money supply shrinks, or even if it just slows in its growth, people suddenly can't satisfy their liquidity preferences. And that is what causes aggregate demand to fall. The answer then is not government spending, but a credible commitment to stable growth in the money supply. But the new classical school took issue with that. With their application of rational expectations, they did not believe the public would be consistently fooled by stable inflation. Expectations for inflation would be baked into the process, and monetary shocks which were unpredictable would still lead to recessions. But unfortunately, the actions of the Federal Reserve are too easy to account for and will therefore be rendered inert by changes in consumer and investor behavior. And any attempt by the government to smooth things out with fiscal policy will just crowd out the spending of consumers and businesses. Another dollar spent by the government will be met by a dollar's reduction in private spending. But that was still a theory based on the idea that markets were not able to reach equilibrium quickly. Real business cycle theory completely changed the script with an entirely new model of recessions. For them, the problem wasn't aggregate demand, it was aggregate supply. Events out of our control affect the productivity of labor, and negative supply shocks would lead people to wisely exit the labor force and work less, reducing overall production and giving the appearance of a recession. For real business cycle theory, recessions weren't a deviation from some trend, they were the trend, representing an economy still at its highest potential. If you want to increase that potential, then cut taxes, they said. Rather than accept that recessions were nothing more than people choosing to take more vacation time, the new Keynesians got to work identifying the rational reasons markets might not always be at equilibrium. For the new Keynesians, the problem is frictions in the economy, which slow changes in nominal wages and prices down. Those nominal rigidities mean that the monetarists were right about the causes of recessions, but the new classical folks were wrong to think that there was nothing we could do. The Federal Reserve could use monetary policy to stabilize the business cycle, transitioning between easy money and tight money policies to counter the swings in the economy. And yet, the post-Keynesians still warned us about hubris. According to the financial instability hypothesis, people had short memories. With long periods of economic stability, they would forget to take the prudent measures needed to properly manage investment risk. Lending rules would be relaxed, and businesses would take on too much debt, rolling it over from one period to the next. As soon as something goes wrong and they can't make their interest payments, those speculative borrowers become Ponzi borrowers, and a debt bubble rises and then pops, taking the financial system down with it. For post-Keynesians, the business cycle is driven in part by this inherent instability in a market system. So, who's right? Who should we listen to? With history as our guide, I think we can draw two conclusions. First is to notice that recessions today are milder, less frequent, and much shorter than they used to be. And that change started to happen after the Great Depression spurred us to take some action to moderate the business cycle. The second is to note that most theories were formed and accepted along two criteria. How well do they explain the Great Depression, and how well do they explain the most recent crisis? And so we've ended up with a hodgepodge of theories that each tell us something a little different. In the early 2000s, the television show The West Wing had an episode that showed staffers at the White House devising plans in the face of a coming economic recession. The character Donna Moss, aide to the Deputy Chief of Staff, offers the following advice.
Donna tells us you're meeting with the economic advisors?
Not so much meeting as fighting off slipping into a coma.
Pretty dense, eh?
Plus, they never agree, yet no one is remotely afflicted by doubt.
It's like with diets, how there's all these different diet theories, all completely contradictory, when most doctors agree that the healthiest advice is just to eat a variety of food in moderate amounts. Maybe that's the approach to take with economists. Take from every theory in moderation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Donna's advice is just right. Each theory gives us a little insight into the problems an economy might face. I think there are certain facts about the economy that we should accept. Wages and prices are sticky, which means monetary shocks really can impact production and employment. The cold fronts are listening, and government policies will always be less effective than we hope. High marginal tax rates do reduce the labor supply. And sometimes it is a supply problem and not a demand problem. Different problems call for different solutions. And since it is hard to tell what problem we might be facing in the moment, you want to lean a little on every theory. And fictional President Josiah Bartlet agrees.
Sir, something happened today at the briefing. I got questions about the economy, and I felt like I was tap dancing.
Saw it. I thought you were fine. Deft. Extremely deft.
As much as I appreciate your attempt to compliment me out of my point, I'm starting to feel a little self-conscious about our lack of vocabulary to describe the economy.
Didn't you get the bagel memo?
You could argue the president's got a responsibility to do it. Setting a positive tone conceivably helps bring about positive results.
It's not that I want to don a shroud. I just think the Pollyanna act's not wearing well. Sir, I'm worried that at some point, avoidance starts to look like maybe we just haven't noticed. We run the risk of appearing out of touch, like one of those presidents who doesn't know the price of milk. Sir, do you know the price of milk?
Not precisely.
Neither do I. Do any of us?
Okay, let's get on coming up with a language plan for talking more realistically about the economy. That session this morning with the advisors, everybody's got a magic lever they want you to push. I've studied economics all my life, but in this job, only a fool is ever certain. You don't push any one lever. You want to push a little on them all.
From every theory in moderation.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. President.